So we now know what the larger play was when it comes to Trump and Israel and Gaza, and the fact that Trump did seem to put a lot of pressure on Israel to end the war, or at least to accept a ceasefire. So Netanyahu didn't seem to have any interest in a ceasefire. There was a deal on the table that was drawn up by Biden's people, and Israel kind of blew up these negotiations over and over again by continuing to demand more and more, and then blaming it on Hamas. And that was pretty much where the negotiations were stuck at, right up until about a week before Trump stepped into office. And the story was that Trump put pressure on Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire deal before he walked into office, because he wanted the ceasefire to be in place for when he started his presidency. And so Netanyahu did it, and it really just proves the point that the president, even before Trump was actually president, whoever is in the office of the presidency very much has the ability to force Israel to do whatever they want at any given time. Nobody has more leverage over Israel than the United States government, and it just comes from the weapons. You tell them that you're not going to give them any weapons anymore, and I mean, they're going to do what you want. So there's some certainty, at least in my mind, that Trump used that leverage. He said, either you get a ceasefire deal now, or I'm going to turn off the weapons, and then we'll go from there. And so, that puts Israel in a position where they have no choice. And that's what Biden could have done the entire time. Obviously, with Trump, no one is delusional enough to think that he did that for the right reasons, because he wanted the Palestinian people to have dignity, because he wanted them to stop being blown to pieces. He obviously agreed fundamentally with Netanyahu's war in Gaza, and he even said as much. He said that we should let them finish the job. That was what Trump said during the debate with Biden. And so, obviously, if we're taking it as true that Trump is the reason that ceasefire happened, it's not because he's an altruist, it's because he wanted to look good. And it was also pretty clear that that wasn't the end of this either. It's not like they're just going to do a ceasefire and all of a sudden the conflict's over and everybody's happy. Obviously not. And Gaza is in an even worse position under Trump than they were under Biden, which was already a terrible position. Biden was already allowing them to be obliterated. And so the only question was, what is Trump possibly going to do that is worse than that? So now we know that Trump, the idea that he has in his mind is to relocate all of the people whose rightful home is in Gaza and Palestine to some other place, and for the U.S. to take ownership of that land. That is Trump's new plan. I don't know if this just came right off the top of his head. He had some meeting with Netanyahu, and that was where he started talking about this. Netanyahu was sitting next to him smiling, so maybe this was something that came up in discussions with them. It's possible that Netanyahu was totally blindsided by that proposition as well, because that's kind of how Trump rolls. He had said some things, Trump had said some things a couple weeks ago about how Gaza's interesting. They have beautiful land there, hinting at the fact that he wants to develop that land. And so now we see that is the plan. And not only that, but he wants the U.S. to own Gaza, whatever that means. I mean, it shows that he's not even looking at that as a place where people live. It's been, in his own words, turned into a demolition site. And so Trump thinks the solution now is for the U.S. government to take ownership of that land and turn it into some kind of real estate haven. That's what he wants to do with Gaza. So there's a couple things that come to mind with that. The first being that Netanyahu obviously would rather that than for any Palestinians to be in that land. His preference, I'm sure, would be for Israel to control all of that land. And that has always been the play. So this isn't necessarily what Netanyahu wants, but I'm sure that he's much happier to have the U.S. In quote ownership of that land, where there can be a wealth of business partnerships and real estate development that benefits Israel and that sort of thing. So it's a compromise in terms of Netanyahu, and it's essentially Trump telling the Palestinian people that you have no choice. We are going to relocate you, and that's what's going to happen. So he suggested, I think like Jordan or Egypt, that they just carve out a piece of land and give it to the Palestinians. Obviously, there's no consideration for the fact that these people's rightful home is in Gaza, and they have no interest in giving it up. I mean, this isn't really a solution when you say, oh, we're just going to give you another piece of land somewhere else, because that's not what they want. What they want is their land. And so just like the rest of Israel's war on Palestine, this is just going to create more problems than we started with, because not only is our Gazans, not going to really be welcome to the idea of just some other piece of land somewhere else that they can have, but it kind of just creates the same problem that has been created with Israel. The solution in Trump's mind is just another colonial project somewhere else where Gazans can be relocated. Who knows what the implications of that would be, what type of conflicts that's going to lead to down the road. We have no idea, but Trump seems to think that this is possible just by sheer force. And he was asked if he would bring the military in there, and he said that they would do whatever they have to. And that's been his answer for any of the tough talk that he has been doing when it comes to foreign policy. So Trump has now said that we're going to send troops to Panama for the Panama Canal. We're going to send troops to Canada and possibly, try to take over Canada, Greenland, and Mexico. And there's been talk about going to war with the Mexican cartels, and just in general doing some kind of warfare with Mexico. So, and that's just 4 right off the bat. Then you have Iran, then you have the Ukraine, and Trump's solution to all of these problems seems to be, we're just going to send American troops there. So obviously, not only is this more war and more imperialism, which is exactly what all of Trump's people promised us we would not be getting out of Trump, but they're con men, so that's what they do. Everybody who voted against Trump knew that would be the case. Nobody's surprised about that. But this is a completely unsustainable, even in terms of imperialism. The idea that we're gonna fight all of these different wars of imperialism in all of these different places in the world with U.S. troops at the same time is absurd. And you could say that maybe Trump doesn't really mean it, that he's just threatening it so that he can use the leverage that America has to sort of shake things up in America's favor globally. He seems to want to take on different territories as a way to, in his mind, fight for, essentially China, because he views the only way for us to be competitive with China is to take on more territory and to do so militaristically. And so we are at a moment where we have these massive immigration protests happening. And today, on the 5th, there's going to be a 50-state protest against the Trump administration in general, the Trump's imperialism, and Trump's mass deportations. So I'm putting information up. Everybody should go and participate in that if you can. It's going to be a protest at different state capitals in every state. So make sure you look into that. Find out where you can go near you. It's going to be sometime in the afternoon, either at noon or 3 p.m., depending on where you are in the country. And this is the beginning, I think, of a protest effort that needs to be sustained and can be sustained in opposition to this Trump administration. We had a little bit of this last time at the beginning of his term with the Women's March in DC and in other places. And then towards the end of his term, there was also the Black Lives Matter movement, which also happened under his control. And that was one of the biggest protests, mass protests, that this country has seen in a long time. And it went a long way to control the narrative of the country. And while the concessions that we supposedly got during that time, none of it led anywhere. And if anything, the police have just been more funded since those protests. What it did do was force Trump to apply his military and National Guard resources within the country to tamp down these protests. He was doing this in DC. He was sending federal agents to Portland to like disappear people off of the streets and grab people up into vans and that sort of thing. There was that guy, Mike Reinholt, who shot a guy who was a part of some group called Patriot Prayer, shot and killed that guy, and then Trump sent, I think it was National Guard or some kind of federal agents, a big team of them to go and just like execute that guy. So in other words, having these mass protest movements in the United States, while it can get dangerous, and under Trump, we are in an administration that is that has the least restraint when it comes to killing civilians because of protests. That's a thing that, especially certainly in America, but in general, most leaders have it in their mind that you cannot allow unrest to get to that point where you have police and military unleashing their forces on citizens. And I'm not saying that that's never happened in America. It certainly has, definitely during any type of labor movement early on in the 1900s and that kind of thing, when a lot of the labor rights that we have now were being fought for. People definitely died over that. And there's been other times as well. But in the course of this massive imperialistic effort that Trump is trying to embark on now, what I don't think he's calculating is that in America there is a sizable anti-war movement. And one of the biggest mobilizing forces in America consistently has been the anti-war movement, whether it was Iraq, whether it was Vietnam. There are massive protests against war, especially when the American public gets the sense that we are involved in some kind of useless war that doesn't benefit anybody but the wealthy. And so we need to make sure that we're harnessing some of this unrest and some of this protest energy that's starting to happen, and we keep the ball pushing. And especially if Trump wants to take on multiple imperialistic efforts at the same time, even if he's not sending troops to places, it's going to require resources, it's going to require attention, and it's going to require shaping the narrative so that leverage can be used in a way that is beneficial to the United States. And the way that we can get in the way of that is by getting in the streets, showing our dissent, and doing so for as long and sustained of a period as possible. And that's only going to be more possible the more people lose their jobs or are pushed into poverty because of the various policies of the Trump administration, which is almost certainly going to happen. This tariffs thing is not going to go away. And I think Trump has backed off of it for now because he sort of was given an out by being able to pretend that Canada and Mexico have caved. And so now we can push off the tariffs for the next 30 days. And it's possible that that's just going to happen again in 30 days and they're just going to get pushed off further. But either way, Trump is essentially using the stability of the United States as a point of leverage and threatening it. He's saying, I'm willing to destabilize the United States in order to put pressure on other nations to get what I want. And the thing that he's not considering there is that the less stable America is, and the more people in America that are negatively affected economically because of his policies, the more of a street movement you're going to have, the more of a mass protest movement you're going to have, especially if that is combined with the idea that America is going to war overseas over just all this dumb shit for no reason, sending troops, sending our young men overseas to fight and die, to take other people's land. We're not defending anything. Trump wants to take people's land. And so while this is dark and none of us want to see this, it also presents an opportunity to make our voices known as Americans in a way that historically has actually moved the needle. In the case of Vietnam, you could say that the enormous amount of pressure that was on the government to end the war in Vietnam is part of why their effort in Vietnam collapsed, because it demoralizes the soldiers who are there, and it also affects the impression on the world stage that people have of America and how united we are over a certain issue. And on the issue of Iraq, in my opinion, Afghanistan, these different wars that we have seen since Vietnam, the playbook has changed to where these wars go underground and they try to really prevent Americans from being confronted at any point with the idea that we are at war. Because if you do that, if Americans just go on living their life as normal and not really thinking about the fact or considering the fact that we are at war, then the U.S. military can operate sort of with impunity, and Americans won't get in the way of what the military wants to do. So Trump is blowing that up by making all of these announcements that he wants to go to war, he wants to send troops here, he wants to send troops there. And it's possible that he'll be able to cause a lot of damage and a lot of chaos on the world stage. And he might even send some troops to Gaza or to Greenland or whatever the hell he thinks he's going to do. But I think the blowback for that is going to be absolutely enormous. That is the kind of thing that presidents start to get threatened with impeachment over, especially an overreach, like, doing these extreme imperialist projects. And while it seems like Trump has free reign and an open hand to do whatever he wants right now and no one's going to stop him, it's not going to be like that forever. And especially a lot of the people that elected him did so because they thought he was the anti-war candidate. So if America enters into all these other crazy wars, yes, you're going to have some people that make excuses for it and say, oh, well, we're only doing it because of this, blah, blah. Some people are just never going to be convinced that Trump is bad for anything that he does. But there's a lot of earnest people out there who are going to be like, whoa, wait, what the fuck? We're going to war for Greenland and Panama? That's not what I voted for. Or even if they didn't vote, they're going to suddenly wake up and realize that they are against that much more than they are ambivalent on the idea of Trump. So I say all this to say that as horrible as Trump's international policy is, as much as he is definitely hurting our standing on the world stage, probably irreparably so, there is also opportunity for dissent being created here. And the anti-war movement being fused with the Palestinian liberation movement in America, which includes some of the youngest and most politically active people that we have, that is potentially extremely powerful. And so it's possible, just like in the case of tariffs, that this is all bluff and bloviation and he's going to back off of it. But as he is, directly taking on policies like trying to abolish the Department of Education, trying to revoke birthright citizenship, that's what he's doing domestically. And at the same time, he's going to overextend himself into all of these imperial projects globally. And what that spells is an extremely unstable nation. So I want everybody to prepare themselves for that, because even if you only have one or the other, even if Trump doesn't destabilize America domestically, but then takes on all these imperial projects, or vice versa, backs off of the imperial projects and just continues to attack people's rights domestically, either way, he is going to continue to destabilize America. That seems to be his goal. And while that does put us all in a very dangerous position, it also puts us in a position to fight much harder than we can when everything seems to be going, as normal and as it should in the status quo. The status quo actually holds us back from being able to mount enormous pressure against an administration like Trump's. So things are probably going to get bad in various ways, but I encourage you all to recognize the opportunity for real dissent that comes from that, the likes of which we have not seen in America in a very long time.